everybody. You've learned a lot about construction materials in the last 2 weeks, but what I really want to focus on today is how to read construction details and tell which materials are which. So we're going to walk through a couple of examples. First, turn to your textbook. We're looking at foundation detail in figure 2-10. This is a simple one to start with. And looking at this detail, you'll first immediately see all of the concrete in it. Look, concrete right here has a very distinctive hatch type. It's a bunch of little triangles and little dots, and those are supposed to represent the different bits of gravel and sand that are in the concrete mixture. This is one of the most fun hatches to draw by hand, so I encourage everybody to try it. Also in this concrete, you'll see this dashed line. I'm pointing to it right now for the welded wire reinforcement that's in that slab. And sometimes you'll see these round, heavy dots. Those are representing the rebar. Because we're cutting through the concrete right now, we're cutting through that rebar. Coming up in our detail, up here you'll see this is the grade. The grade is the ground level because we're cutting through the ground in this detail. And down here is a hatch pattern for the earth or the dirt. Okay. This is a piece of structural lumber right here, this sill plate. And it's represented by the outline of the lumber and then 2 diagonal lines in an X. So that makes it very easy to see and tell that it's one piece. Just having the lines without the X makes it much harder to read. So right here we also see a structural piece of lumber. This one is in an upright position and it also has the diagonal X. This piece here, this joist, we are seeing this joist on edge. In this detail, we are not cutting through it, and so that's what we mean by face view. Face view, we are looking at the side of this joist, but not cutting through it, so it doesn't get an X. Okay, and the final piece I want to point out right here is this piece of plywood. Now, plywood can look different depending on the scale of your drawing. In this scale, you are seeing some lines for the different thicknesses or plies in that plywood. If you have a drawing at a smaller scale, like you're zoomed out, you won't be able to draw those plies and have them be legible, so you leave it out. If you actually have a larger scale, like you're zoomed in on this particular section, there is a more complicated plywood pattern shown in your textbook for that example. Let's move on to a second detail from your textbook. This is an eave detail shown in figure 2-3, so go ahead and turn your page. And this is the top of a wall we're seeing here. Here is your wall stud. It is in face view. We are looking at the side of the stud, but we're cutting through these 2 members right here. This is your double top plate. This piece coming down at an angle is your roof rafter, and it is also in face view. Sitting on top of the roof rafter is the plywood sheathing, and on top of that we have the actual roof members. That's probably asphalt shingles, although they don't have it called out. Okay. Now, some wood in this picture is finish wood. So this right here, this fascia, you see the hatch pattern in the fascia is more like the grain of the wood. Okay, it does not have the X for a piece of lumber. It is a finished piece of wood. This is a plywood soffit right here. And this piece is a brick veneer. So see the diagonal hatch lines for the brick. Okay. The other thing I wanted to show you is the gypsum board. Gypsum board is shown by the 2 side lines and a dot pattern inside in between the 2 lines. I'm going to move on. Taking a look at the Brick Veneer Residence print set, turn to sheet 1 and detail 1. You can go ahead and pause right now and flip to that page if you would. And right here we have detail 1, the typical basement column. So let's look from the bottom. Right here we have an edge view or a face view of a small concrete pad. Here we are looking at the side view of a pipe column. This doesn't get any hatch because we are looking at the side of it or the outside of it. We're not cutting through it. We are, however, cutting through this wide flange beam. This is a W8 by 17. Remember that the 8 represents the height of the beam. Actually, they call it the depth. And the 17 represents not the width, but the weight of the beam. So we're cutting through this steel beam, and it's got a hatch pattern through it that looks like 2 diagonal lines together. This is really typical for a metal hatch pattern. Moving upwards, above the wide flange beam, we have a 2 by 10 wood joist resting on that beam. That joist is in face view. We're looking at the side of the joist and not cutting through it, so there's no hatch pattern. Sitting on that joist, we have 1/2 inch plywood, 1 by 2 stripping, and 5/8 inch undergrade plywood. Okay, so there is a number of different layers going on here, and you can see that plywood hatch pattern right here. Here is a wall. We're cutting through the wall, and this is the bottom plate of the wall. It's probably a 2 by 4. Oh, it says so right here, 2 by 4. And so it's represented by the rectangle with the diagonal X pattern. On either side of the wall is gypsum board, sheetrock, drywall, whatever you want to call it. And that's represented by the 2 lines for the sides of it and just a dot or a stipple pattern inside. On either side of the wall here, we have a base molding or floor molding. And these are finished pieces of wood. So you'll see, if you look really close, you can see that hatch pattern that looks like you cut through wood. So it's showing the rings of the wood. Moving on to the last detail I want to talk about today. This is a wall section detail from the brick veneer residence. It's on sheet 3, detail 1. So pause your video and flip your sheets until you find that one. Let's start at the bottom. Again, I always like to do that when I'm reading details. And down here we see the foundation. You can tell it's concrete because you see its little concrete hatch pattern. It's got various triangles, dots, circles. Also, it says so right here, concrete footing. Okay. Here are the rebar that we're cutting through in this concrete footing, and they're called out as number 4 rebar. So moving up in our detail, we've got a CMU or concrete masonry unit. It's called out right here. Foundation wall. Here is our sill plate. It is a 2 by 6 piece of lumber. As you see, it's a piece of lumber because it's a rectangle with the X pattern in the middle of it. And here's another one right here. Another piece of lumber. That's the edge joist, by the way. This joist right here, resting on the sill plate, we're seeing in face view. We are looking at the side of this joist right here, and that will continue off to the left. Sitting on the floor joists is the flooring. Just like in the last detail, because this is the same house, it has the same type of flooring. We've got some plywood, we've got some 1 by 2 stripping, and then we've got an underlayment of an additional layer of plywood. Here's our exterior wall. Okay, so here's a piece of lumber right here. Here's a 2 by 4. It's got that X pattern, and here is one here under the windowsill. Now take a look. Here is here's a hatch pattern we haven't seen before, and that's insulation. Look at this lazy S pattern. This is typical hatch pattern indicating insulation. Moving up, this is the windowsill. And it's a finished piece of wood. Look at the wood grain marks we're seeing in there. It's a finished piece of wood. And right here we have the glass. Let me go back down because I missed down here. This is brick. Notice how they're not delineating each individual brick. We're not showing the mortar, but we're showing the brick as a whole. All of this is brick, and it's got that diagonal brick hatch pattern. This individual brick is called out separately because it's a different pattern than those. Moving up, here is the top of the window, the head of the window. This is the structural header above the window. You can see it's two pieces of wood right here. It's a double 2x10 header. Moving up, looks like there's some insulation in the wall above. And here's the double top plate at the top of our wall. You're going to be learning more next week about the way that a wall is framed. So don't worry about that too much today. Today we're just identifying the types of materials. Moving up, here's our roof rafter coming through. Here is insulation in the ceiling. And this is the roof sheathing, which will be plywood sheathing. And in this drawing, they're not even indicating the roofing on top. Thanks, everybody. I hope this helped. See you next week.